there were some connections inside. So we were trying to spin off a losing department, losing division, how we actually do things and make it better right. Initially, the initial idea was to make the business good again, to revive it. And midway between, we know that the market's changing. The clients are changing, a lot of things are changing, and we knew it was not going to be viable in a short-term period of time where we can turn around this division to make it profitable or even do any business around here. So instead, we thought about something else, was to do a series of different actions to sell it off. And eventually we did. We sell it off to one of our biggest competitors, 3M. So in a way, how do we view this? We view this as a success because the selling was just right before the economic tsunami. And if not, we will be holding on to a losing company, losing division, where it will drag down the stock price of the company. So when we're talking about whether we see the difference in terms of the project itself, how we see whether it's good just to focus on, hey, these guys are just going to IPO or doing something as a real business itself. Times change, and business change, the markets change, and especially right now these days, it changes like over minutes or by hours, by seconds. So the flexibility of how the strategy is quite different from the strategy that we did before, like 20 years ago, where, hey, this is a strategy we follow for the whole year. Okay, fine, the core strategy probably never goes away, but then again, how we execute that, those kind of strategy might be moving a little bit more faster or much more faster than we have anticipated previously before.
And just quick question, you mostly you invest in seed investment, Series A, Series B, just to get them.
Does who?
Both of us.
Yeah.
Oh, well, for me, I do early stage.
Yeah. So before Series A.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Yes.
Sure. Hi, thanks very much. This is a question for Derek. I'm sure you've got lots of great relationships with VCs in basically outside of Asia. So anecdotally, could you please share with us what VCs or investors in the States, what their risk appetite is for investing in startups based in either Hong Kong or Asia, some in this region?
So you're talking about U.S. investors wanting to invest in Asian startups.
Yeah, and kind of what anecdote, more than anecdote, because we read about, we read articles all the time, but I just want to hear more in an anecdotal perspective. When you talk to them, when VCs call you and say, hey, are there any interesting companies in Asia I should be looking at? What are some of the risk appetite that you are seeing with investors outside of Asia that wants to be in Asia?
Well, there are two kinds. I mean, you have some Western VCs. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the U.S. It could be Europe as well.
Yeah.
If they don't have the knowledge base of having their eyes on Asian deals, then they have to depend on like a partner out here, right? So they usually try to make some sort of bridge or network with an Asian investor. Doesn't even have to be an investor, but just someone who knows the landscape, someone who understands that particular space that they're interested in, or has the language skills that can be their eyes and ears on the ground here. Sure. And then you have other investors who are like larger funds where they're able to set up an office here and actually hire local staff and actually monitor the deals. So I think the big differences come from the first example, which are funds that don't have the people on the ground here, and they're usually funds that have less experience. They don't have the resources to set up an office here, or maybe the mandate of their fund, the way it's set up. They can't invest they can't invest directly into Asian opportunities, and they have to co-invest with other funds.
Right. So that's the example I was actually talking about. So again, kind of speaking, when you talk to these funds, that are more Western investors, what do you think currently is the risk appetite for investing in startups in Asia? Are they a little bit more conservative just because they're not so sure, they don't know?
Well, it's for investors in the U.S. Or other areas, for them, part of it is investing. The other part is monitoring.
Right.
So if you're investing in a deal and you don't have other investors come in, then it's your responsibility to manage that from far away.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And then you have to depend very much on the management team, the founders, to actually communicate information back and forth. So it's a much harder, much more challenging process.
Right.
Not impossible, but it's harder. What would make more sense is if an investor in the West was thinking about investing in a company out here, they could set up the opportunity whereby they say, okay, if you're raising money, we'll invest, but you need to find a local investor that will come in first.
And then we'll come together.
Yeah.
Depending on these
Yeah,
investors.
and then they'll come in
Yeah.
together, maybe they'll communicate together and set up some sort of reporting structure or supervisory structure where they can monitor the deal, where they tell the local investor here, it's like, okay, well, we're from far away. Make sure our goals are aligned. We both want to exit the company in the same way. We both want the strategic direction of the company to go in this way. So since you're there on the ground, you manage it here, and then we'll put in the funding.
Sure, so it seems like the risk appetite is quite low in that sense, right? I mean,
Yeah, but you just have to structure the deal in a way where it fits either your risk appetite or the way where you would feel most comfortable in doing the investment.
Okay, thank you.
That's a question for both of you. Based on your previous experiences, what are the most common reasons for the failure of startup companies?
There's a lot.
Yeah, like tons.
I mean, I've seen so many. Sometimes it's very easy to blame the company because it's the easiest thing to do. It's like, well, you said your business plan was X, Y, Z. You didn't achieve that, so you failed. But to be fair to startups, I don't think it's always their fault. Sometimes it's the fault of the investor as well. Sometimes it's the market conditions. Maybe the technology you have was really great this year, and then next year something came along and you got leapfrogged. So there's different things. But I'll give an example of each one. So in the case of the founders, what I find is one of the common mistakes that founders make is that there's this very traditional saying, right? Love the customer, not the product. But for founders, because they're so intimately, so emotionally tied to their product or their service, they can't see anything around them. They just see the product. And the product has to be perfect. If you do version 1.0, well then of course you're going to do 2.0. When you do 2.0, you can do 3.0. But when is that thing going to go to market? When are you going to start making money? Because for me as an investor, the quicker you start generating sales means the faster you're not spending the funding that I've given you, right? It's two different things. But if the founder thinks that, well, fundraising is easy because I have this great product, so when I run out of money, I'm just going to go out and find another investor and raise more money. That's not a good. It's not a good behavior because you think that you can take as long as you want to go to market. But investors have a different opinion. It's like, look, even if your product is 85% ready, just get it to market and then you can tweak it later, but just start selling. So I find that in the first example, founders, a common mistake they have is they have this emotional attachment to the product, and that's fair because it's their baby. They really want to have the most perfect thing go out, but at the same time, there's that challenge there. Is that you have to get commercial as soon as possible, right? So it's love the customer. Don't love the product, love the customer. Whatever the customer wants, you have to give that to them. They're the ones who are paying for it. They want the product. Don't just get it out. The other, because what happens is the longer you wait, of course you run out of funding. Your runway to take off. Number two, it offers an opportunity for your competitors to come in. So that buffer of time that you have ahead of your competitors gets shortened, And then you have this third thing, which is could be your technology could get leapfrogged, and that's not good either. So in the first example, that's what I see with founders. For investors, they don't know the space as intimately as the founders do. They think they do, right? But the knowledge they have is, like I say, it's like the past 5 years of experience that most investors have. They don't have that length of time that the founder has. The founder usually has many years of experience in doing what they're doing, and the investor is investing in that person based on that experience. But some investors think that they know everything, but it's only been 5 years of experience, and they want to impart that by force to say, well, you have to do this. We're shareholders. We tell you what to do, and that's also not good, because sometimes it will push the company to a direction may not necessarily be right, or they might say, well, we want you to merge with this other company. Why? Because we say so, and that's also not good. So sometimes it's the fault of the investor. Third one, your technology could just get leapfrogged because it may not be the one technology that was so hot 2 years ago, but it might take you 3 years to get your company commercial. But by then, maybe the technology will have changed.
From my part, I look at two things. One thing is the time spent by a CEO or by the team itself, the core team itself. So are you spending a lot of time on marketing, or are you spending a lot of time mucking around with the iOS or the Android app, which I see a lot of companies that does it and comes over to me and say, hey, that's when I'm building this app, and how much time are you using? You're pretty much using 24 hours a day, which means that you're not using any time to do any sales and talking to the customer. Because like there is my main concern is actually making the sales first, just to get it more sustainable, because you won't get, even if you, how great your product can be, and even if I can find an investor, you still have to sign the documents and do all the due diligence things. It's not going to be overnight. So who's going to sustain you in between those timing? You have to do it yourself. So your business has to sustain your living expenses first. So just doing business first. And the second thing that I look into is pretty much like a due diligence kind of a work. So when I see something that's good, I don't invest yet. I don't look into too much yet. I look into the people first, which I've just mentioned. And the second thing is I'll give you business first. I'll give you some business channels. I'll help you expand. I'll give you some real business to actually implement it first. So that's pretty much like a test for me, and say, okay, you actually have something you need to deliver something to actually sign it off and say get some revenue out. If you can go through those and actually say, okay, I actually can deliver a product or service and the customer is happy with it, then I know it's something real. Instead of you coming in and say, hey, this is one big, really good service around here, but then again, I can do a lot of stuff. It can fly to the moon, it can go underwater or whatever. And I say, okay, let's get a real customer in and let's make a deal. If you can't sell, then there's something wrong with it. Is it the product? Is it the market? Or is it the customer? Or is it something because of you are just giving me lip service, something that's not real? So to me, that's part of a way of doing the due diligence thing. Someone in the back? Yeah.
I'd like to talk about something slightly, some segment or sector which are slightly different. There are a lot of traditional manufacturing business from Hong Kong. Well, some of them may have been in business for a long time, so they're not really startup, but they may be now taken over by the second generation, which have new ideas. So I guess for the business or startups we have been talking about, they probably may be mainly or a lot deal with technology on the tech side, right? They're more common, but for these more traditional kind of manufacturing business, whether it's clothing, toys, or other stuff, well, what's your suggestions to them? Let's say if the second generation actually they have some good ideas, new ideas, and well, will they be able to make use of angel funding or private equities? What's or suggestions to them.
Can I do something? I want to say something.
No, sure. The mics, we can use them, yeah.
Okay. I am in the manufacturing business. I talk in English, okay? For more than 25 years, I met so many manufacturing companies when they are in middle age and then they come to retire. So I suggest that gentlemen who are in toy business or some kinds of electronics business, if they have a new idea related to technology, okay, think of something that can stop your competitors to copy you. First, develop some barrier to entry. And then, I suggest them to ask the Hong Kong government enterprise support scheme first to finish the proposal. And the government will check your idea, viability, sustainability, or business model. And if you can get money from the government, then you can talk again to others, such as Angel and VC.
Okay, thank you. Want to answer the question?
Your question was
SMEs.
Traditional manufacturing
traditional,
business.
but you're talking about the second generation putting new ideas into the traditional
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's really an issue of technology. I can only speak from technology point of view. Technology will always improve the efficiencies of a traditional business. And if you want to stay competitive, and you want to stay ahead of your competitors, so something what you were talking about is it's always going to be an advantage, right? If you take, for example, something like traditional manufacturing, being able to process orders, like buying raw materials from your suppliers. Well, if it's always been traditionally a handwritten business, and then now it becomes automated, what would come next? So you have your computerized functions of processing your orders, instead of the old traditional style, like picking up the phone and calling your suppliers and telling them what they want, and then faxing things over. Now it's become more automated. What would be the next step is actually predictive models or analytics, where you actually have algorithms in the software that's set up so that it determines what you should order. The computer will tell you what amount you should order instead of you trying to forecast what those orders would be. So I think it's only a benefit.
One of the company, you're talking about SMEs in Hong Kong. We work with a lot of SMEs as well, with different organizations. There's an interesting case I can tell you. One of the people I know, he's an owner for lunchbox cartons, developing manufacturing lunchbox cartons. So it's like a 10 cents or 1 cent per carton. And for each like $1,000 or $10,000, they only make like $100 or even less, Hong Kong dollars. And one of the things that he was thinking about was, okay, how do I restructure myself in this new competitive environment? How do I actually become more competitive? Because, hey, the market's pretty low, things are coming from Taobao and everything, it's much more cheaper. So it goes down to, it's not about, I look at it as a business. And one of the things that he did was he restructured himself and he focused on a higher-end clientele. He was actually selling to the masses directly as a supplier to cheap fast food shops, or McDonald's or other fast food outlets, which is not giving him pretty much profit. And then he started changing and say, okay, I'm going to do something for Lady M. I'm going to do something for City Super. So he actually just restructured himself and say, okay, I'm not doing the cheap stuff, I'm doing something much more of a higher value add. And that's one of the ways he actually said, okay, it's actually helping me make more money per carton box from the lunchboxes because I'm doing customized carton box, high quality carton box for these high level or high end kind of a franchise or food outlets. So like I said, technology is one thing, but also from my point of view is how you actually restructure the business itself is more or less like, are you actually willing to change yourself? Because it takes a lot of guts, seriously. Because he said, okay, I was at a crossroad, either I do it or die. So he chose, I do it and try and then let's see how it goes. And it actually helped him and say, okay, this is the kind of road that I'm following through. So at the end of the day, there is no easy answer to it because each SMEs are different. And there are factories, there are things that going down. And many of our clients and many of our friends I know, even in China, the traditional kind of manufacturing companies or traditional businesses, they're not working anymore. Let me give you another example. They might be good 10 years ago, and right now they're thinking about, okay, I'm passing the torch down to my second generation. And the second generation says, okay, this is boring kind of a business around here, let's start off something new. So either some of them will start something new, or some of them will say, okay, this is my daddy's thing, let me see how I can restructure it and turn it into something new, where the second generation adds in like technology, robotics coming in, and actually improves the efficiency and cost efficiency ratio to the existing kind of business. And you know what, one way that's sort of like helps in terms of how they survive, because at the end of the day, I'm just looking at how you actually survive today and tomorrow.
Sure, but those SME examples, are they able to get funding from people like you?
Well,
or?
then it will be looking at something different, because incidentally, let me give you the second part of the story
Okay.
of the lunchbox thing. And he was looking at me and saying, hey Desmond, can you fund me? I said, okay, what do I need to fund you for? So what exactly are you trying to do? And he said, give me like $7.5 billion. I said, what the hell do you want $7.5 billion? I said, I need to buy a factory so that I can store my stuff. So it's like an inventory kind of space, because Hong Kong is very expensive in terms of storage space. So he's renting out right now because that's the biggest chunk of money, that expenses that he's going to use it. And I said, give me $7.5 billion, I need to buy inventory space, like a warehouse. And I said, if I got $7.5 million, why do I have to invest in your company, right? I could just buy the property itself and then it just sits there and it actually goes up. And I said, you can actually do the same thing as well, right? Because I'm not going to fund you for something that I'm going to help you to make money and you're not helping me to make money. So, and there's not a lot of growth in terms of that because you're just buying warehouses. There's no business growth in itself. So I actually turned it down, of course. But of course, in a way that I told them and say, hey, you should just keep on doing what you're doing right now in terms of how you expand that thing, and think about what's going to happen by tomorrow when all the Taobaos and Alibabas will say, hey, I've got something like 5 cents or 10 cents, 1 cent cheaper, and actually can deliver into Hong Kong. It's pretty difficult because each company is very different. And if you're leveraging on one of the core challenges of Hong Kong is the rental space, that's one big problem that we're looking at. So there's no easy answer to that. Yes, over there.
Hi, thank you for all that's been discussed so far. Assuming, let me ask a question this way. Assuming the business is viable and you have a strong idea, what I'm hearing is that there's still a big question whether you can find investor. And you talk about how investors may be more used to traditional type of investments like property or the stock market. So that's like the lack of sophistication of investors in Hong Kong. But there's also the problem of how US investors may not understand the market here, and so they will not be investing. So I think this funding, the access to funding seems to be a recurring theme and issue. So I'd like to tap your experience in terms of the infrastructure in Hong Kong, whether you see kind of what's lacking, what kind of, are there enough consultants, are there any VC funds that are quite accessible in the market? Because you mentioned small private equity funds, but again, I don't know whether there's a lot of that. I work in fund space, but I'm in the traditional fund space. Like I work with the major retail fund managers that invest in stock markets, and a lot of them, they can't invest in startups. So what is lacking?
Let me start with this one first of all. Let me tell you about what Hong Kong has first. There's a lot of media talking to me about, asking about what's Hong Kong's lacking, how Hong Kong is too small or whatever. One of the things that we work very closely is with Chinese investors, and pretty much all of the Chinese investors are not looking at China kind of investments, projects. They're looking outside. They are looking at US, they're looking at Europe, they're looking at Middle East at the same time, because they know they have the money, but they're also looking at good projects coming along. And they're considering that anything non-China is better than China, which in a sense is true, in a way, but in a majority. So Hong Kong acts like a pretty good bridge in this area where we have the connections. Number one, we have Facebook around here. So which means that we've got a lot more information than what the Chinese in mainland can get. So that's one good way. And also there's a lot of new projects coming along. We got the government support, we got different investors from overseas, from Europe, US coming to Hong Kong and looking at, okay, how then can they piggyback into China back? But then again, they have to settle in Hong Kong first and look at it from a more strategic international point of view, which helps Hong Kong because that means that everyone is coming down to Hong Kong and we can actually act like a bridge. Now for Hong Kong people, or Hong Kong local investors, that's a good thing because, hey, you may not be savvy in China because the Chinese will always be the most savviest in China, but in terms of overseas promoting and also the connections outside, we're much more better. I used to work very closely with the cultural ministry in China because of one of the projects that I have for online music and stuff like that. And one of the things that they know, the Chinese state knows, is that we got a lot of content, we got a lot of money, but we don't know how to market outside of the world. So you talk about how many singers do you know, international singers, you can tell me in terms of names. And then I ask you how many Chinese singers do you know, tell me about their name. So they know what's lacking, but the fact is they are still looking at projects outside, so which means that Hong Kong still has that edge in connecting outside to the world, which is pretty much our topic today around here. So that's what I'm observing right now these days.
Well, you asked what's lacking, I would say VCs. I think for the most part, because the traditional VCs are lacking here, where the funding ends up going to is it ends up being in the angel investor space, right? So Hong Kong has lots of high net worth individuals. So I find that a lot of the funding comes from high net worth individuals, we call them angels. What's lacking from them is their experience in investing in these companies. They don't know how to do the due diligence, they don't have the domain expertise, they don't know the process, they don't know how to exit. There's a lot of this, and all of the activities that the government provides is to support the startups, but there's nothing that supports the investors. So you have a lot of investors that have money, they just don't know how to invest, they don't have the deal flow, they don't know how to originate these deals. They don't have that type of experience, they're not being educated on it, so they put their money in property, they put their money in other asset classes, but they just don't know how to get into this space. Right? The only way you get into the space is when your cousin or your friend or someone's like, oh, I know this person who has a startup, what do you think? And that's how it starts. But there hasn't been an exercise or a program that brings all the investors into a room, and then you get experienced investors like, okay, let me tell you how to do it. There isn't that structure there. So I think that's what's lacking here. But investing it's all trial and error. Right? The first time you get so excited because this deal's being put forward to you, and the founders are like super nice to you, and they seem very transparent, and that PowerPoint presentation was so awesome, but you didn't know that someone else wrote it, and they give you everything, they tell you everything you want to hear, and you really want to write that check and give it to them, and you do, but then something happens, it doesn't go right, and then you have this bad taste in your mouth, like, oh, well, then the next one that comes along, you get more gun shy, right? Because you don't want to pull the trigger, you're not sure, and you get more hesitant. But to invest, you have to fail, right? So you only learn from your mistakes. It is just part of the learning process.
Well, I guess that's the reason why we have this investor forum around here. So just to help out with all the people who wants to invest and also the existing investors, how we actually go through trial and error and to avoid some of the mistakes that we make together. I guess timing is a little bit short. We just have one more question. Who wants to do it? Okay.
Sorry, just one thing. Any investor that tells you they don't have any bad investments is lying.
I have one more question for you. First of all, how do startups get through your door? How do you, what? No, seriously, it's a valid question. You know, I'd love to know, in the sea of startups, how do they get through your door? What have you, in your experience, what have been more successful, like the channel that they got through to you, what has been more successful for you as an investor? And lastly, if you can kind of conclude, upon the last question, how do startups in Hong Kong then look for funding that, obviously as startups we want some strategic investors as opposed to just people that throw you money. So what is your advice to startups in Hong Kong that are struggling to, that would struggle to find funding because of the lack of VCs and because of the lack of experienced angel investors? So it's just that in conclusion, I guess.
Okay, so your first question, you asked two questions. Your first
Yes.
question is how do you, as an investor, how do you look for your deals, number one?
Yeah.
And number two is as a startup, what's the best way to look for funding? I think to answer your second question first, the best thing to do is get a mentor. Find someone that, they don't necessarily have to be an investor, just someone who's experienced that can be your mentor, that can coach you through this process, because it is challenging. And it could be a strategic partner, or it could be someone in the business world that's more experienced that can guide you through it. And buy that person a coffee, and just sit down with them periodically, send them a newsletter, let them know how you're doing. The first question you asked is how do I look at that? How do I get my deals? Well, I'll tell you what I used to do is I used to work for a larger fund. We used to manage money for the Hong Kong government. And as a condition of managing money for the Hong Kong government, we had to look at every deal that came in through the front door.
Okay.
Right? And that can be a very long, very challenging process. So I was reviewing like 60 business plans a week. And it could be anything from the guy who wanted to set up a wonton noodle shop to something software-based or something. So it's very, very different, but it's very challenging to do that. If you're a larger fund, sure, you have lots of capital deployed. If you're a smaller fund, like myself, then you have to be much more careful about the number of deals you evaluate, because you just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So we work purely on a referral basis. We don't have sort of an open policy where we just get all kinds of business plans in, because I just don't have the bandwidth to evaluate them. So it's all by networking within funds in the community. Large funds are great because they have to pass on a lot of deals because they don't fit the investment criteria that these larger funds have. And 90% of the time, just like when I used to work at a larger fund, we would pass on early stage deals because they didn't fit the investment criteria. And most of that criteria was because you're not commercial yet, your product is maybe 12 to 24 months out from commercialization, come back to us next year, but let's keep in touch. They would have their own network of small investors or angel investors that they would pass these deals on to. When I used to work for a larger fund, I used to pass them down to smaller investors that didn't have the big capital, they had the smaller amounts that could take the investment risk and invest early. And now I'm just one of those guys where I work with large investors and I let them know what I want to see, and then when that opportunity comes up, I get those opportunities.